Good morning, everybody. As we said yesterday was already, I hope, a little bit of a capstone, bringing together what you've heard and learned during the last 10 days. And now it's up to you to synthesize this into something that might actually be useful to communicate to others. So the idea is, as we said yesterday, to divide the group into four. This is one dividing line. The other dividing line is there in the middle. These two sides will go into Sala 1 y 2. There will be somebody to get you there, and the other two groups will stay here or sit outside, depending on how much interference you can tolerate and is being generated through the heated discussions that we will hopefully have. I think there are a number of issues that arose yesterday that have to do with communication. One of them being what kind of science do we need to communicate? Obviously, what I did yesterday of moving from global change effects and production effects and social impacts right down to enzyme kinetics is something that is not necessarily appropriate to communicate to politicians or the general public, because it will not help understanding and will not initiate action. Another problem that I think has come up again and again, and probably earlier in the weeks as well, is what is this climate change in our perception? I've heard, and probably all of you have heard many times, this tremendous rainfall that we had, is this climate change or is this just a tremendous rainfall? How do we decide what is just weather and what is change in climate? Another point that came up with Ines's maps and also with some of the impact analysis that I presented is climate change is not the same everywhere. At the same time, we have the global conventions. Yesterday there was a question, should we have a global government, UN government, to dictate to the world how to deal with climate change? Or at what level should these decisions be taken, given the granularity and given the variability of climate change as we see it here in small islands, in the Andean highlands, and closer to the poles? And finally, I would like to try also an experiment, and that is related a little bit to the idea that milk comes from the supermarket and not from the cow. People who live in cities have a great belief that they're protected. Infrastructures looking after them, governments are looking after them. They have a lot of votes, so they can influence government decisions. People in rural areas have much less influence on that. What really is, and how can we communicate the vulnerabilities of the cities? There is a tendency to think, well, if you're living in a city, somebody will save you. And maybe that is not always the case. And given that in Latin America, so 70% of the population actually lives in some kind of a city, not only mega cities, but also smaller cities. Those who come from Argentina are very aware of what happened in La Plata, for instance. That was a climatic event, a tremendous flood, lots of damage, death, and destruction. And really there were inadequacies shown up very clearly, not only in the design of the city, in the settlement patterns, but also in the responses. So exploring a little bit from personal experience or from your analysis of what you've heard during these days might be a good idea. So these are four topics that that the two of us have thought about between yesterday and today. My question is, do you feel these are adequate, or do you have any urgent concerns that you would like 20 people to discuss and come up with a one-pager or maximum two-pager at the end of the morning that we can post on a web page, send out to some people? I actually ventured to promise to the Argentine government that I would bring back something to them as a conclusion from this brainstorming session at the last day. So it would be nice to have something that we can send to the politicians as it's just an output from a group of young scientists grappling with climate change. Any comments, questions, suggestions?
Can you repeat the topics? Yeah, please.
What level of science is adequate for communication? How do we, from our disciplines that sometimes are very specific to something very general, what part of our science needs to be communicated? The reason for bringing up this topic is we asked a group of scientists from the IAI some time ago to comment on the development goals, which is something somewhat related to climate change and global change and sustainability. And all these interviews, the little iPhone thing or cell phone things, self-made little chats that people put on the web page, they're all still available on the IAI page, on the YouTube page. And looking at them, I suddenly realized, with one or two exceptions, none of these scientists contributed to the topic as scientists. They contributed as superior citizens with better education, maybe, or a consciousness that was derived from their higher education and experience that they had, but none of them volunteered anything from their specific science to the discussion. And obviously, if science is to support global change or reactions to global change and to climate change, we need to decide what is the role of me as a scientist and my science in that communication, and at what level we communicate science. So I think that is one interesting topic. What level of science is appropriate for communicating, and what could your contributions be? Make this very personal. This is an opportunity of having 20 people who think about their careers, about their science, and so on, contribute to that question. Level of science, level of resolution, level of, the example I gave yesterday, we can explain the urgency of action by enzyme kinetics and by phytohormones. That's probably not the best argument to put forward to a public or to talk to a newspaper, or maybe it is, if we package it right. The question is really, and you have to decide, or the group that takes that theme has to decide how they want to frame this. Is it depth of science, disciplinary work? Is it bringing interdisciplines together in order to provide a broader synthesis? And what do we as scientists, as groups of scientists with different disciplines and different experiences still need to think about in order to package this better? Clearly, there is now a global consensus. Yes, climate change is happening, and there's a consensus of which we presented yesterday on being certain, less certain, or uncertain about different of these effects. After a while, that gets a little boring. How do we communicate the urgency that we have, and what level of scientific evidence can we present? Any any comments on this one still? Then the second one is from your personal experience and based on your scientific understanding, everybody in your group, in that particular group, what experiences are there of trends in your country, what you read in the newspaper, what you hear in the news, of extreme events that add up to what you perceive as climate change? Basically asking the question, is that what's happening this summer, climate change or not? You can take regional experiences, local experiences. We hear these anecdotes. Oh, this has never happened before. For many years when I worked in northeastern Brazil, people were saying, it's getting drier, it's getting drier, it's getting drier, and we cannot produce. Agricultural or meteorological statistics for northeastern Brazil do not confirm that. It hasn't been getting drier over the last 50 years, but one of the things that has happened is that the already rigorous climate was and is accompanied by soil degradation, by less water holding capacity in the soil, by different vegetation patterns and so on. So maybe there were interactions. These are all questions that might pop up in the group. How do we provide a picture of climate change based on our analysis of what we see, what we hear as a group of scientists? Not when I arrive somewhere, taxi drivers talk to me like they talk to everybody, and you get a view of their views of climate change. So imagine you're the taxi drivers and give you a view of climate change, and see what comes out of this. Any comments on that one?
I think what's lacking for, at least from the point of view of young scientists,
I think this is still being recorded, so we need to.
Yeah. I think one thing that's lacking in Latin America, at least from my point of view, from my experience, is that for young scientists, there are no instances where we can, meet with the politicians or the decision makers in order to understand for ourselves, to see what they want, how they see the world. This is usually reserved for experts, which are the oldest scientists in a field in a given country, or the experts of the IPCC level. So, but I don't see this interaction with young scientists like this group, for instance, which I think the IAI can contribute to that. I think that would be something that I would like to see, at least in the near future.
That's what the IAI is already doing. Marcella has an excellent program. All her courses similar to these. The big difference is they're not restricted to academia. She always mixes up practitioners, politicians, decision makers, and academia. Now, this comes out of a very academic setting, FAPESPE, and so on and so on. It's a format that was defined, and we've used this format for doing a more academic exercise. But Marcella certainly is trying to overcome these limitations. And if this is one thing that you want to communicate out of this group, saying that, yes, we are young scientists, we are building a knowledge base on climate change, but we're also building our careers at the same time. And we would like to combine these two things in a way that is more responsive, or can be more responsive, to political concerns. And therefore we would like to have what kind of event? A training event, a joint training event, a retreat, a meditation session, whatever. I mean, it's wide open. This is clearly a deficiency. And Marcella is working on this, but it needs a lot more, and it needs to be spread much, much wider. Many years ago, in the US, there was a group of academics that initiated a program up in Snowmass in the Rockies, in which scientists and politicians, young and old, I was much younger then, so young ones were invited too, came together. There was a relaxed atmosphere. There was no observers. No questions was too stupid to be asked on both sides. There was no competition, I know better, you know less, and so on. And it was extremely useful during the first few years of these activities, and now this is not a direct cause-effect relationship. The funding for climate change science in the US went up by a factor of 10. So it's one of these contributions. It's something that is very important and something that is very much lacking, particularly in Latin America. And if such a message comes out of this group, wonderful. The next topic was what level of decision making, global versus local versus regional. A few months back, I was at a meeting of municipalities in Argentina that where politicians at municipal levels have come together, concerned about climate change. And the projects that they presented, and the idea was for them to present projects and find funding for projects and so on. They were municipal projects. They had to deal with waste removal. They had to deal with bicycle lanes and so on. But all of these are valid contributions. So the question is, how do we see the structuring of the decision making, and maybe depending on where we place different levels of decision making will provide different levels of motivation of decision makers, but also of the general population to engage in action of adaptation or mitigation. And then finally, are cities really protected from climate change, or are they more vulnerable? What can we say about the relationships of vulnerability and city life? There is a tendency for city people to say, well, okay, the prairie is burning, or the eastern part of La Pampa province is burning up, or Portugal is burning, but most cities are pretty safe because they're being protected more actively. The question is, can we say something about cities, about your city? I know that almost for 50 years now, Buenos Aires has plans for structuring constructions, roads, parks, in order to be able to get rid of excess water through infiltration in parks, and so that it can run down to the shoreline. Those plans have never been realized. They exist partially, but not in completion, and therefore they suffer a lot more inundations than they would. So cities are vulnerable, and how do we define that vulnerability? Any other comments on this, or any additional or replacement topic that you think is really exciting and galvanizing? Good. So you're roughly clear on the divisions. These two groups will migrate. These two groups will separate. And yes.
Do we have to choose one of these topics, or you're gonna give one of?
Okay. Right. That would be useful to assign them. How do we do this? I just assign them. The level of science, this group 1, let's call it group 1. The aggregation of experiences and extreme events, group 2. The geographic level of decision making, group 3. And cities, group 4. And if somebody is hugely concerned that they would like to be in another group, you can sneak over, but please don't make this a herd migration so that everybody runs out. And we meet back here at coffee break, which is at 10:30. So you have 1 hour for deliberations. Well, let's continue. I know that most of the groups didn't have enough time, obviously, to finish the task, but the idea was to capture some ideas from the groups, discuss them within the groups, maybe come up with 2 or 3 or 4 ideas that might be worth communicating further down the line. And I think we have 1 hour left for these tasks. And I don't know what the program after 12 is going to be. Does anybody? None of the organizers are in the room. Qual é a programação depois do meio-dia? Meio-dia acaba. Tá bom. Okay. So if you don't want to have to stay on, I'm just being told at 12 everybody is free, so we need to finish this at before 12. My suggestion is that we spend the next half hour or maybe a little bit more on communicating to the whole group, each one of the 4 groups, presenting ideas, doubts, and a little synthesis. And then the last half hour, you can go back, or the last 20 minutes, you can go back and put the dots on the I's and cross the T's, and send a short summary of your conclusions and of your work to the organizers so that they can be distributed. I assume you already have lines of communications, know where to send it to, so that this afternoon or over the weekend it can be distributed, and then we can use it maybe to inform politicians, and you can use it yourselves as you go back home as a reminder of what was achieved in these last 2 days. So which of the groups feels that they're ready to roar and ready to present to everybody? Go ahead. Volunteers start.
I'm going to introduce, and then you in a few sentences say what we... Oh, okay. Okay, so I'm going to introduce the framework, and then you just say in a few sentences what you guys came up with.
Okay.
Okay, so you're just going to say a few sentences about what your group came up with, just to summarize. Okay. So our question... Our question was, from your personal experience and scientific understanding, what experiences are there of trends in your country of extreme events that add up to what you perceive as climate change? And okay, so our introduction is, and I wanted to share it because I feel like this summarizes our course here, and it is that extreme events are increasing with global environmental change. As global temperatures increase and greater quantities of energy remain in the Earth system, the baseline upon which extreme events are occurring is elevated. Extreme events care not for geographical boundaries or discipline. Here we synthesize our perceptions of extreme events as both scientists and citizens of the globe. And then we broke into three kind of like groups of disciplines, and so each of them is going to say a few sentences on our synthesis.
Well, We are the ecological group of our huge group, and we synthesize two major extreme events related to climate change in Brazil and also in Côte d'Ivoire. And it was the drought and then the floods. Here in Brazil, we highlighted the droughts in northern Amazon related to the loss of biodiversity. And in southern Brazil, we discussed the effects of floods in the example in Santa Catarina state in southern Brazil, which related to landslides and a huge loss of biodiversity down there. In Côte d'Ivoire, our colleague, which works with urban ecology, he also said that effects and floods affect hugely the families and the dispersal of families down there. So that was a synthesize of our ecological effects.
Okay, thank you. So in agricultural group, we have discussed about, is this working? In agriculture group, we have discussed about 3 extreme events issues: drought in northeast Brazil. Drought. Apart the drought, we have discussed also about the changing in climate system in Russia, and the third one was the flooding event in Argentina. So we have done the brainstorming exercise, working on the adaptation strategy regarding each extreme event. And also we have also teased out some perspective for the future, because in some countries like Brazil and Argentina, they don't have any adaptation strategies at all. For example, regarding the flooding events, they don't have any irrigation system or water harvesting system or water diversion system, so that the intensity of the rainfall may not affect the land use or agricultural system. In Russia, for instance, the decrease in snow is very critical for agricultural production, because the snow is very important for soil conservation and the viability of the seed. And in Brazil, some adaptation strategies have been done so far regarding the drought issue. For instance, conservation agriculture, a conservation tillage, improvement of the cropping system, and also a development of water harvesting system. So that is all for now. Thank you.
Okay, so the group of climatologists, this is working, right? Okay. We talk about specific observations and projections about extreme events in particular countries, but then, just to be brief, we sum up with the idea that we lack from data and reliable data, registers of extreme events to study the attribution of these extreme events to climate change. So we think there should be more investment from the governments in these issues, just to improve this research. And also regarding adaptation strategies, there are many initiatives like system alerts, like SEMADEN or other ONGs and NGOs, but those are for short term, so there is still lack of investment for long-term problems. I think that was all. Okay, thank you.
So I speak for the socioeconomic group for the social sciences. So particular regions of interest which have come out from the discussion is Bangladesh and India. For Brazil, there is very little that we know about the socioeconomic consequences due to natural disaster or extreme events owing to climate change. Bangladesh is one of the most vulnerable country, it being the biggest delta in the world for its own natural ecosystem. It is one of the most vulnerable to extreme events like flood and drought. There are many natural extremes which are and floods and cyclones every year, and 70% of Bangladesh is flood prone, and which kind of causes every year life, property and services which gets affected because of such events. Between 2008 and 2015, there were 250 plus natural disaster or extreme events. In 2008 alone, the flood, which was disastrous, led to 30 million migrants or displaced population. As for India, one of the leading causes one of the leading consequences of extreme events is droughts and cyclones, tropical cyclones, and also extreme rainfall. So meteorologically speaking, the events like dry spells, erratic rainfall intensity are on the rise. Also, in the last 100 years data that shows for India that droughts, floods, and tropical cyclones, they are also on the rise. There are events like floods, which are particularly very costly, costs about $40 to $50 billion every year. That's an economic estimate. Singular events are also gaining a lot of attention, particularly the million-plus cities like Chennai or Mumbai, which due to flood events, they incur a loss of about $8 to $10 billion. Now, this is a question which is open to scientists as to how do you attribute one single event to climate change, and it is still under, it's one of the forefront of research. At least in India, we do not know how do you attribute it. So that's something yet to be known. But particularly the socioeconomic consequences that are associated with such extreme events is channeled through agriculture, because agriculture is one of the most dominant occupations in India, and so most of the people who depend on agriculture get affected because of such extreme events, leading to farmer suicide, political unrest, and so on and so forth. The other aspect of socioeconomic aspect that is also not known is how such fat-tailed events are going to shape the distribution of the burden for the governments in terms of how the economy is going to get affected. Because the macroeconomics of disasters, what it says is that immediately within few years, the economy gets badly hampered, but it takes a long time for poor economies to recover. So that's also another area which is ongoing in the context of developing countries. Thank you.
Group one? Two?
Thanks.
Pode colocar a computadora no pódio se quiser, não?
Sorry?
Talvez é mais fácil.
Ligar ali. Acho que pode ser uma boa. Você quer?
Não, só para colocar, para apoiar.
Okay. Okay, guys. So the question we tried to answer is what level of science we need to communicate. So we concluded at first that there is no right answer for this question. It depends. It depends on which people you're trying to communicate, because we have farmers, we have different stakeholders, we have the politicians, and there's no right answer to this question, because different people need different levels of information and need different levels of language also. With some people you can be more specific, and with others you must go with more basic language to reach out. So, and also, we must improve our strategies in climate change communication, because our assumptions are that we are living in a digital world and most people live in urban areas, have smartphones and good connection to the internet. So in that way, we need to incorporate experts in social mass media management that use tools like storytelling, marketing, and design that transform scientific information in an everyday language that can be understood by the majority of people. Also, it's a very hard task for the scientists to do, and we don't have time and we don't have funding for this. And also many scientific journals don't like this kind of approach, and so we need to try to incorporate the science funding agencies. We need to pressure them to try to give money to bring people from the social communication, media, so experts to help to make this bridge of science communication. So we have divided our group in some specific stakeholders or media, because, as I said, there's no right answer to this question. So each group has worked on a different kind of target people. So,
okay, in my group, we talked about schools. We said it's important to reach out to the younger generations with a message of climate change because they are the future, and like the saying goes, we need to catch them young. We can achieve this by educating them from an early age with the use of maybe other visuals like TV programs, like dramas, like cartoons, just to make it in the simplest possible way so that the next generation can be educated. And we said it's imperative that they are aware about their environment and how their decisions will affect their future. An informed generation will make a transformed generation.
In my group, we spoke about policymakers. So we went to the conclusion that maybe the idea is to take the problem at the reverse, not just like singing the alarm or giving just numbers. The idea is how to prove that climate change actions and fighting climate change can lead to opportunity. Can be socio-economic opportunity and opportunity, an improvement of the quality of life. And saying the message is like doing this will like comfort like the political power and make the politics more legitimate more the power and the local action that are made by politicians.
In my group, we looked a bit at the media and how the media is important for spreading the message. So we concluded that we have our information in scientific basis and scientific language, and we need to convert this information into common language, into everyday language. So we need these experts, because scientists, okay, sometimes we know that we need to communicate, but we are not really good on that. So we need people that is expert and then can spread the message better. And we realized also that we are living in a digital world. So we need to put all of this information to the people in the social media and mass media so that people will have more access. And then we can use tools like storytelling, like videos, and tools that will approach more the common people and that they can understood better the message.
In my group, we talk about how to communicate about climate change with farmers. And we think that it is really important, first of all, to meet with the leaders of the community, and then to let them know what are our intentions. And after that, we can gather with the leaders of local crops or small farms to communicate. And how are we gonna transfer this information? Well, we are gonna like do almost the same thing as they were planning to do. We are gonna look for a translator, even if we speak the same language, because sometimes they use some terminology that we don't use, and sometimes we use these scientific words that they don't even know, and we forget about how do they speak, like in a common and simple language. And what else? Okay, it is super important to make them feel involved in the process and not let them in a different level as we are. We are in the same level, scientifics and all the community.
So in our group, we talk about the local communities. So for us, I believe that the research should be multidisciplinary to expand the results better. The language used to talk about the climate change must be cognitive, and the actors must move into the communities to speak in the same way that they do. For example, in Amazon, approach the riverside communities of the Amazon. This example is really successful with the fisher agreements. in the lakes, made through the cognitive maps and game among everyone in the community. And once I asked to a fisherman about his thing about the climate change, and he answering, climate change? No. What means? I can't believe it. No? And what do you see in the river? And he said, the river? Yes, the river is rising. But sometimes the drought season is too strong. But the fish, yes, is much more increased. So yes, so this you need you need know how can you say about the different different themes, no? Because the people don't know what you say.
That's the message, guys.
Who's next?
I'll start introducing the topic. I'm going to talk a bit about the national strategy. You can talk a bit about that as well.
I can talk about local. Yeah.
Yeah, regional with me. So, okay. I can hear you. Can you hear me? Okay, I'm going to stand over here. Right. So, our question was about what level of decision making, whether it be local, national, regional, or global, should be addressing climate change. And, well, we added to this a little bit of how how scientists can contribute to this process. So, well, as a definitive answer, we came to the conclusion, of course, that all levels of government have a role to play in addressing climate change. And, well, we started off with looking at the local issues of climate change, including adaptation and mitigation. And, well, you want to...
We had a very vibrant discussion in our group, and we had a lot of insights about local decision making. We think that is very important for us as young scientists help government to think of adaptation options and consider geographical location, and we also could contribute in producing science to support their decisions. Thinking locally, integrate people, local people, in these strategies, and consider also their traditional knowledge. Think of inclusive adaptation. Co-production knowledge is also a key word for us. And look for best practices elsewhere and share these best practices. Think of local education with local institutions. And as a scientist, we should take responsibilities in sharing information with local communities.
We also thought that on a local level, mitigation is an important process, although it interconnects with other levels of government. But mitigation can be addressed in terms of sustainable farming and local transport, community transport ideas and things like that. But moving on to the... hang on a second. We talked a little bit about the national and regional levels and how how policy making can address climate change. Particularly, I think, well, energy policy, which we didn't really talk much about in this course. We only touched on it, but there are certain things that regional governments and national federal governments can make a difference, and that is, of course, policies that encourage renewable energy, energy efficiency, demand-side management, and I think it's important that science is included in that decision-making. So rather than looking for government to approach scientists, I think it's important that scientists approach decision-makers and stakeholders. That was, I think, an agreement amongst the whole group. And, well, I think Alex has more to say.
Yeah, we talked about many issues as they have talked. But also we focused on the interconnectedness of countries, regional countries, that what affects in one country as far as climate change is concerned, it also concerns another. So we said there should be collaborative implementation of efforts in terms of coordination. For example, we cited different lakes which are shared between countries like Lake Victoria in East African region. We talked about Amazon as a major biome in the region of South America. So those resources need to be preserved, and decisions should not be championed by one country or by one region, but all partners must come up to participate. So that's what we talked about. And also we talked about the interdisciplinarity, that stakeholders within the region must be brought on board, must discuss, must be engaged, and must agree the way forward on how to formulate good decisions which are to be supported by the budget for implementation.
Yeah, so we'll talk about the global level and how global level of governance can address climate change. And of course we have things like the United Nations Framework Convention, which is very important in bringing different parties to the process, and the Paris Agreement, which sets a global goal, and of course that's a very important part of the process.
And our group came up with a suggestion we would like to share with you about taking responsibilities as young scientists. We thought of creating a group, an interdisciplinary group, to share best practices, ideas, suggestions, results, and join in existing groups and take some space to help decision makers to do their policies for us, actually. This I think is the main outcome of our group. Yeah. Maybe we can get some support from III, from FAPESP, who knows, no?
So in a word, be more active as scientists, as was discussed a little bit yesterday, and in a interdisciplinary way, and get involved in stakeholders and decision makers.
So why are we talking this? At a global level, we think as young scientists, we can have a voice. Maybe we would have contributed to discussions on the Paris Agreement if there was room. We could also voice our ideas through the IPCC, because it's a global kind of conference, forum, which is making decisions. But we, younger scientists, we are doing something which we think can contribute. Setting the levels, 1.5 degree and 2.5 degree, that one which they are trying to work on, it doesn't affect only a specific type of people. The brain is to inform those levels. they are not from a specific sect of old scientists. No. We need to be engaged. We need to be in a platform, on a common page, so that we contribute to one another.
All right, thank you very much.
Good morning. So our group had some productive discussions on our topic of climate change and big cities. And our general approach was to think of some ways that climate change is impacting big cities, discuss the specific impacts, and then identify some potential solutions. We just kind of brainstormed as a big group. But we're going to split up among ourselves now and talk about some of the specific impacts and our solutions. So I think we're going to talk about three main things: heat island effects and effects of heat, water distribution, flooding, droughts, those kind of things, and then migration. Those are our three general topics. So I think the first person will be talking about, Victor will be talking about heat islands.
Good morning. Is it afternoon? Not yet. So good morning. Okay, thank you. So as my friend has introduced, we looked at three main areas. I'll take you first through heat islands. So as much as urban heat island is local phenomena, regional phenomena, but we are looking at vulnerability. It has tendency of increasing vulnerability of people in the urban setting as compared to rural setting. So we are looking at some of the things that can be done to mitigate or adapt to this. So for an example, in a case of urban setting, you notice an urban setting is warmer than a rural setting. So in the event of a heat wave, for instance, you notice that the urban setting is more vulnerable as people in the rural setting. So some of the issues that we came up as mitigation measures are efficiency use of electricity or energy at large. So, for instance, in the kitchen, for most people who stay long in the kitchen or in the showers, you can ask yourself today, how long did you take shower? I'm sure if the water was cold, you would not have done that. You would have shortened it. So those are some of the lifestyle measures that we can put in place to reduce use of energy in the cities. Another case was about the green spaces. You notice in literature we read about green spaces as the lungs of the city. So we need to increase the coverage of green spaces in the city through various ways. You have seen cases where we have green walls, we have parks. That's part of the efforts to increase green spaces in the city as a measure of reducing the heat island effect. So another issue is management of land use, because the amount of energy in the cities is as a result of our surface cover and building. So depending on how much we use our land, the type of land cover determines how much energy is reflected back into the atmosphere. So it's a much of a practice that can be put in place to reduce the energy in the atmosphere. Another thing is about education. I think we noticed this is an issue that most people are not conversant with. We engage in some of the activities at our personal level, not knowing that they contribute to this urban heat island effect. So it's good to do more for education. I think mostly for the youth like us, we can do this very well through various media platforms, just to educate people on the do's and don'ts towards reducing energy in the urban cities. Another thing of concern was population distribution, because you notice population is a factor, because there are very many factors that contribute to the energy as with regard to the population size, because they are in terms of emission, waste products, it's also has to do with the transport. So we looked at distribution of population as a way of, one, reducing energy emission in the atmosphere in the city, and two, as well as reducing vulnerability, because you can see a case where, in case of an event happens like a flooding, whether the city is very densely populated and less. So it's a two-way situation, reducing the concentration of emissions into the atmosphere or energy into the atmosphere, and as well as increasing their resilience. So another aspect is government planning, although that we may not play a huge part in it, but at least we need to send out the message that if the government plans well, regardless of the amount of energy in the atmosphere at a given time, it can reduce the vulnerability of the people in the city. I'll take you through another factor. Another topic that we looked at was flooding. And for flooding, we looked at it in two ways. We have cities that are located in the lowlands, like coastal cities and the ordinary cities. So both are at risk, are vulnerable, especially those in the lowlands because of sea level rise. That's one of the cases, so they are very vulnerable. The same case for those that are inland. In the cases of heavy storms, they are because of land use, there's a tendency of occurrence of flash floods because of the land use. So this also a thing that's making the urban population vulnerable. So the control measures, the solutions, that is, one is just as the urban heat island, this as well we can do education, to educate people, especially on the usage of land. And this is to the government, because we have very little to do with the land use other than the city planning. So we can send out a message as planners. Then early warning systems, we can put them in place. I think recently when you are a study tour, you are taught about, we saw some of these cases. I think this is one of the ways to reduce the vulnerability of the people in the place. At least keep them informed. In case of occurrence, you give them information in time. So another thing is we can do flood risk zoning so that we understand which areas are very vulnerable and try to control the settlement. People respect the risky flood areas. Then we also need to improve city defense and action plans as approach of reducing the vulnerability of the people. Thank you.
So yes, our group had a very wide brainstorm thing. So that's what Victor was trying to give a huge message. So when it comes to one of the solutions that we came up with, which is give education and information to population, what I want to share to sum up is that I was working at the monitoring system for I'm working since January in this kind of job, and what we had, we had the information to give to the population in Rio de Janeiro. We had a great, and believe me, it is a great system and working for the civil defense in São Paulo, Rio de Janeiro, and I believe the efforts go widespread like in the whole Brazil. But when it comes to give the information to the population, it wasn't our choice giving this. The department that took care of giving the information to the population didn't want to pass the information because they were afraid that people might freak out about it and didn't know what to do or leave their homes, I don't know, scared or unsafe, do the wrong thing, go to the wrong places. So what I want to say is between all this solution, there is the society. There is the scientific researchers, there is all this information and forecasts that we do. And believe me, it is, people try to, the first thing that when I was trained, you're dealing with lives, right? This information is not for you, it's not for you to know that, oh, that's nice, this is, temperature is increasing, rainforest is increasing. No, it's for society. You have to save someone. You have to give this information to save a life and everything. And it is more than science. So I was highly motivated, and we had the information, and we passed it on. So maybe if investing in education is a solution, and that's what I believe, we would have done some great advances in this topic. So invest in education, it's possibly a great solution. That's what I wanted to say. So I think you're going to sum up all the things and say goodbye. Yeah.
Oh, I think I'll just say goodbye. Thank you.
Thanks. That was great. I think we all saw a few points that are very useful, very important. And I think I would like to pick up on one or two of them. One of them is the young scientists getting together. Regrettably, there's nobody from the IAI here. So, because I'm no longer with the IAI and have absolutely no influence on what happens in the IAI. But I can tell you that there is a small association of young scientists within the IAI. We can send you this information. There are 4 people in charge. They mostly came out of projects of related to water, surface waters, water management, and so on. So this is a bit of a disciplinary group. But I think if you set up a Facebook group or something of the sort to stay in touch and to develop opportunities, I can tell you that in past training events where people came together from different countries, several groups managed to get funding. There was participants from Colombia getting together with Chileans, developing a small project which did get funded, not by the IAI, but by one of the science funding agencies and so on. So do keep this in mind. I think you have a very, very strong case to make because this is your future in 2 ways. The future under climate change is your future, and your career is your future. And you're the only people who have that combined opportunity, challenge, and motivation to move this forward. And it would be great if out of this gathering would come something, and maybe you can talk to USPE, FAPESPE, that have experience. FAPESPE does not fund anything other than research except for this very specific event here. But there may be opportunities there that are certainly worth following up. Secondly, something that came through certainly in the last statement, but also in a number of the others, at what level to communicate and so on, is available information, knowledge that we already have is not being used because it doesn't reach those people who could or should use it. So that is a theme that we need to think about more deeply. And when we start talking about this theme, always the same things come up. For the last 20 years, I'm getting bored with it. Translate the language. Yes, we need to translate the language, but we need to stop talking about translating the language and translating the language. We're going in circles. Maybe I'm getting too old, but we are going in circles, and I want you to avoid going the same circles that I went 15 years ago. There are people everywhere that understand your language. If you go into a ministry of the environment, in all likelihood, the people there who do the analysis, who do the scientific work within the ministry, They come out of the same faculties as you. So that division between politics and science in terms of language is largely an artificial one. Yes, there are many politicians, the visible ones, the electable ones, whose expertise is, it may be to kiss babies before elections or something of the sort. These may not be your partners in that dialogue, but there are lots of them there, and go find them, and you don't need the intervention of translators for that. The other one is to start thinking about where you can take the first step rather than waiting for a funding agency or something like this to come and help out. And that is why, for instance, do you not include, as a matter of course, in a research proposal, one paragraph on communication strategy? Think about it. All of you write research proposals. All of you do research. You focus on the subject matter. You focus on the way to find solutions. Spend a little extra time at the end of it on a communication strategy that goes beyond, I will publish 3 papers at the end of my thesis. But that relates the problem, the audience, and your developing expertise. And maybe if reviewers, if funding agencies keep seeing this, they wake up. Many of the funding agencies are aware, and I personally, the next meeting I'm going to next month is a selection for climate change scholarships by the Humboldt Foundation in Germany. And I would invite you to all look at their pages. They have opportunities to spend a year in Germany with a German institution, particularly on topics related to climate change and protecting from climate change. These are available to every young scientist. They are looking within that not only for scientific excellence, but also for leadership potential of the applicants. So communication strategies are important, and a few years back I made that suggestion, and it is now a condition of the proposal writing for them. So doing these small steps, taking the initiative yourself, if you realize that you're spinning your wheels because you're producing a lot of good results that are not being used, how can you stop spinning your wheels and get a little bit more tractions? The other highlight that I saw, that there were many very good ideas, but something that I noticed particularly when talking to the policymakers, highlight opportunities that have to do with climate change and adaptation and so on, not only when you're talking to decision makers. One of the problems, if you look at the newspapers, if you think about attitudes, one of the problems that is happening with climate change and with interventions is this doom and gloom. And doom and gloom and bad news only on something that has global proportion frightens people into inaction. This problem is way too big for us to solve. Era o dedo do Deus, as Lula said when southern Brazil suddenly found itself in the dark without electricity. So we have to overcome that impotent feeling in front of a global level problem. That's why I gave you the example of the municipalities. The decision on climate change of a small municipality somewhere in the hinterland of Argentina is going to be on bicycle lanes. Fine, that's a step. And if we do enough of them, maybe it changes somebody's minds in addition to changing their leg muscles. And I think this generation of knowledge, you are the ones to achieve this. Do try and maintain this group in one way or another. And I will shut up here so that you have a little bit of time to come back together, put the dots onto your reports, send them to your communication mail, and think about how to keep in touch. It was a great meeting for me. I have learned a lot. I hope you have learned a lot as well. Thank you very much.
So I know that not everybody does Facebook, right? So we Befukadu and I from Ethiopia, we created a Google Plus platform. The only thing you need to sign up for it is an email address. So you don't have to use Facebook or anything like that. And the idea is to collaborate, share opportunities, postdocs, conferences, everything. So I'll find a way to get the platform to everyone so you can join.
Is that platform the one that our group was talking about, or is it a parallel platform? I think we should just come up with one thing. Or is something different? Let's avoid to proliferate with Facebook, with things. So let's have, I think, at least one main and avoid spamming as well, please. And I don't know how that links with what was being proposed there.
So the reason why I chose Google Plus is because you're not going to get a bunch of emails. You basically have to go to the community to see things. And I'm happy to sit down with you and try to see the overlap. The idea here is also that, like with Facebook, like not everybody does that. And the other, somebody had a question if it was just for our group or if we want to share it. I think that we should share with our colleagues so that we can connect with new people as well. If you guys don't agree with that, I'm fine with whatever the consensus is, but I would like my network to be as big as possible.
And so it doesn't end up hinging on one person only. Perhaps if you could raise your hand, 2 or 3 volunteers to work with you and help you out, because this is a big group, you may find yourself overwhelmed. Okay.
More questions? Well, first of all, I think Professor Holm has actually closed very nicely our school. Round of applause for him, please. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for Professor Inês as well. So, we are finishing. I'm not going to make a speech, a long one, you see. But I have to thank some people. First of all, you have seen people here hang around with microphones and put the presentations there and things like that. So I'd like a round of applause for these students. That's mine. Thank you. Thank you very much. And also in special as well for Livia. She's not here, but she's there trying to get your tickets, electronic tickets and things like that. So she's really been working very hard indeed, and I'd like to thank her very much. Please. Okay, it has been 2 weeks very intense, as you probably know. I'm sure everybody is a little bit tired, but also I hope that has helped you to learn a little bit more about climate change. As you see, climate change is not only the natural science, it's also social science, it's also impact, a vulnerability, and an adaptation. So everything was covered during this school. I know some of you are more for the natural science, the other is both social science, but the idea here is really to give you an overview of the idea of climate change. So it's much more than we can learn from one of the IPCC reports. Now, we have the opportunity to read all the reports, but they are too long. So that the idea here is that you have a sip of some of the ideas that is there, and now you can walk by yourself, try to learn more, and do actually one thing that was really important during this school was the networking. I'm really proud to have you here, because I could feel that you are working together. We have 30 countries, different countries here being represented, which is amazing. Now, we are more than 120 people here from different parts of Brazil and other places. So you were able to get together, to work together, to really discuss nice, important science here. And you are an example for everybody in this world, because we can, yes, work together. We can be together to transmit the information we've got here to the governments around the world. So do that. And thank you very much for your presence. I'm sorry if something was not able to be arranged for particular people, or if you made some mistakes along of these 2 weeks. But you can be sure that we try to work hard to make your life here as pleasant as possible. Have a good, safe journey back home, and be careful around. We still have some hours for some of you. I was asked that one of the minibus could leave later. I called the agency, they said it's not possible, because the times of this minibus was based on the first one that's going to get the airplane. So I know some of people, you have to wait a little bit more at the airport, but it's a chance for you to go around, eat something, and do some shopping. You didn't have the opportunity to do that during the course. Okay, and what Professor Holm has told us is quite important. I mean, we can still be together. INCLINE is an interdisciplinary center, so we can you can send to me this kind of information. I know there is a paper that's going to be prepared trying to describe what we have learned here, what's the different visions from the different countries about climate change. I think this is quite important. I would like to know the results from this work. Also, send the other information you just discussed over here, then you can try to put together and send again for you. Walter and Simira, they have the whole emails from everybody. So perhaps you can send the archive for everybody, so we can be in touch in some way. I'm sure I'm going to meet some of you in somewhere in this world. I usually go to a lot of workshops and meetings from different parts of the world. So we'll be together again. If I can prepare a new course with new directions, I'll let you know. Thank you very much indeed. Have a safe home. See you one day. Thank you.